There is a vast pantheon of Egyptian gods, but I wanted to give a quick overview of some of the myths surrounding Ra, Osiris, Horus, and also how they interrelate with the kings and pharaohs of Egypt. So, Egyptian cosmology is really important to understand that the Egyptians believed that the world was flat with the Nile at the center. So, the world comprised of what we conceive of as Egypt, essentially, and then that was surrounded by dangerous deserts and chaos that the gods kept at bay. So understanding that idea that they are constantly at the mercy of these chaos gods outside of what land that they were familiar with is super important to understanding. Really, I think the Egyptian focus on needing to be safe in the afterlife. So Set or Seth, depending on the translation, I mean, we're translating from hieroglyphs. So he represents the dangers surrounding Egypt as the god of disorder, the desert, and foreigners. Ra is the self-creating. He's the first god who creates the natural world and its cycles. In one creation myth, people are born of his tears. And this is fairly common in creation myths, that people are formed from some kind of fluid, shall we say, that comes from the gods. And in this case, it's tears. I can't emphasize this enough. Pharaohs are considered sons of Ra. The roles of pharaohs is to maintain order in the physical world and as Mot, the cosmic order. The pharaoh is the bridge between people and the gods, according to our text. And so it's super important that you understand that if you've already seen the lecture on Egyptian spirituality, I mean, there is a spirit which is shared between, like a soul force, we would call it, is shared between gods and kings and pharaohs. And this is because there's a hierarchy where kings and pharaohs are part god and they're intermediaries. And this is super important for us to understand how important they were in the culture. And for instance, in this statue that we're seeing here, looking at the statue, being in the presence of the statue was like being in the presence of the king and in the presence of God. So Mot, both a god and a concept, is the ideal balance and harmony. Osiris is the great-grandson of Ra and became pharaoh when Ra left Earth, lived as a mortal on Earth with Isis, his sister and consort. He represents the ideal king. And there's, as you start to look, like in our book, there's a pretty good chart of the relationships between the gods. There was no rule against intermarriage between siblings, because this is completely the practice in Egyptian cosmology, as it was in, frankly, early British history as well, before we realized that there were some genetic problems with that. But for the Egyptians, no problem at all. Like, keep it in the family. So Osiris represents order, balance, and truth. He's often shown with green skin, the color of the Nile, when it first rises each year. We'll see this theme of the color of skin also being prevalent when we look at Hindu gods. Set tricked Osiris into getting into an ornamental box and then set him adrift on the Nile. When the chest comes back to Egypt, Seth cuts Osiris into pieces. Osiris puts him back together, and he comes back to life, but is always associated with death and the western region where the sun sets. So that's how he becomes associated with this idea of renewed life. So Osiris is found in the pyramid texts, incantations inside the pyramids, guiding the kings to the afterlife. He's the fair, merciful judge of the dead. There's definitely like gods you want to be associated with and gods you want to be afraid of, and he's one of the good ones. The heart of the deceased is weighed against an ostrich feather, and he decides if the person has lived according to Mot or should be giving to the devouring god Amet. Osiris taught people agriculture and often carries a flail to symbolize fertility. In many, many cultures, the god who's associated with agriculture is is seen as a boon to the people. In one festival, boxes are built in the shape of Osiris lying on the ground, then seeds are planted. The festival continues as the seeds sprout, celebrating his resurrection. So Ammit is the god who devours the unjust heart on Judgment Day. He's the crocodile god. Apep. Ra meets Osiris each night in the underworld to start the new day. Here he battles Snake, or sometimes depicted as Crocodile of Chaos, Apep. Horus is the first son of Osiris and Isis. The sky god, his right eye is the sun and his left is the moon. In other myths, Horus guides the sun across the sky. The crown of unified Egypt is a very important artifact for Egyptian culture. Set is jealous of Horus and they battle for the rule of Egypt. The gods finally side with Horus and he conquers Set. Horus represents the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt through this time. So this material came from our text. It also came again from Catherine McClimate's Great Mythologies of the World piece from the Great Courses. And I hope you enjoyed it and are enjoying our study of Egypt this week.